parents gave my childhood bedroom to my sister's kids without asking. Now they're mad I won't pretend everything's fine and then. I am Jacob, 28. It had been a while since I'd been home. Life just got busy, you know? Between work, friends, and trying to keep my own place in order, the months had slipped by faster than I expected. My parents lived about 3 hours away, which made visits less frequent than they used to be, but I always looked forward to them. There was something comforting about coming back to the house I grew up in, sinking into the bed in my old room, and feeling like, even for a weekend, I could just stop worrying about the rest of the world. That was the plan this time, too. I'd even told my mom a week ago that I'd be staying for a couple of nights, and she'd sounded excited to have me. She mentioned that Emily and her family would be around for dinner one night, so it was shaping up to be a full house. My sister and her husband Marcus had 3 kids, Chloe, Jackson, and Lily. The kids were cute and all, but they were a lot. Every time I saw them, it felt like they came with an explosion of noise and energy, and honestly, I didn't mind just being the fun uncle who visited occasionally and then left before things got too crazy. I arrived at the house late Friday evening, a little tired from the drive, but looking forward to crashing in my old room. The house was the same as always, warm, familiar, smelling faintly of my mom's lavender air freshener. My parents were thrilled to see me, giving hugs and asking how work was going. It felt nice, like a soft reset button for the stress I'd been carrying. After catching up a bit, I grabbed my overnight bag and headed upstairs. It was muscle memory at this point, walking up those creaky steps and turning left at the top of the hallway. My room was the last door on the right. Except, when I pushed the door open, I stopped dead in my tracks. It wasn't my room anymore. The walls, which had once been a deep navy blue, were now some pastel yellow color. My old bed was gone, replaced by a toddler-sized plastic race car bed and a mound of brightly colored toys scattered across the carpet. There were posters of cartoon characters plastered on the walls, and a big plastic bin full of stuffed animals sat where my desk used to be. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. For a second, I thought I might have walked into the wrong room. But no, this was my room. Or at least it used to be. Mom? I called out, my voice already tinged with disbelief. She appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Oh, right, I probably should have mentioned that, she said, brushing her hands on her apron. We turned your room into a playroom for the kids. Isn't it cute? Cute? That wasn't the word I'd use. What happened to my stuff? I asked, still standing frozen in the doorway. We boxed most of it up and put it in the attic, she said with a shrug. The rest, well, you didn't need it, so we donated some things. Donated. The word echoed in my head. My room, the one place in the house that had felt like mine, even after I moved out, was gone. Just like that. Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Mom frowned slightly, as if she didn't understand why I was upset. It's not a big deal, Jake. You haven't stayed here in months, and the kids needed a playroom. Emily's here all the time, and it just made sense. We thought you'd understand. Understand? I could feel my face growing hot. So you just decided without asking me? I mean, this was my room. She gave me a look that was half apology, half dismissive. You're not a teenager anymore, Jake. You're an adult. It's just a room. You don't even live here. I was so stunned, I couldn't even form a proper response. My dad poked his head out from the living room downstairs, clearly trying to gauge if he needed to step in. Hey, Jake, he said lightly, it's not worth getting worked up about. Let's not ruin the weekend. I let out a short laugh, one that didn't sound as amused as I'd intended. Right. Sure. Not worth getting worked up about. Just my entire childhood wiped out like it didn't matter. My mom sighed, the kind of sigh that said she was done with the conversation. Jake, it's not like that. Your stuff is still here. Well, most of it. But honestly, you're overreacting. The kids love having a playroom, and it's not like you were using the space. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process the casual way she was brushing off my feelings. The room wasn't just a space to me. It was where I'd stayed up late working on homework, where I'd had my first awkward phone call with a crush, where I'd hidden out after bad days at school. It was the one part of the house that felt like it belonged to me, and now it was unrecognizable. Instead of saying anything else, I just turned and walked back downstairs. I could feel the tension settling in my chest, but I didn't trust myself to keep it together if I kept pushing. When I reached the living room, my sister Emily was sitting on the couch with Marcus, a glass of wine in hand. She barely looked up as I came in. "Oh, hey, Jake," she said casually, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. The kids were sprawled out on the carpet, playing with some blocks and making a racket. It was clear they'd already taken full ownership of what used to be my room, even though I hadn't even known about the change until 5 minutes ago. I sat down on the armchair, my jaw tight. Emily must have noticed, because she gave me a curious look. "Everything okay?" "Not really," I said before I could stop myself. "I just found out my room's a playroom now." Emily didn't even look remotely apologetic. Instead, she laughed. "Oh, yeah. The kids love it. Thanks for giving up your space for them. It's really made a difference." Giving up my space? I hadn't given up anything. It had been taken. "Yeah, well, it would have been nice to have been asked," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Oh, come on," Emily said, rolling her eyes. "You don't even live here. It's not like you needed the room. And honestly, Jake, you barely visit anyway. Mom and Dad are just making the housework for the people who are actually here." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to snap back. "That's not the point, Emily. It's the principle of it. It's still my room. Or at least it was." She just shrugged, clearly done with the topic. "It's just a room, Jake. Don't be so dramatic." I looked over at my parents, hoping for some backup, but neither of them said anything. My mom was busy cleaning up in the kitchen, and my dad was scrolling through his phone, pointedly avoiding eye contact. It felt like I was the only one in the room who thought any of this was a big deal. I'd expected to come home and feel like I belonged, but instead, I felt like a stranger in the one place that was supposed to be mine. I excused myself not long after that, saying I was tired from the drive. But the truth was, I just couldn't sit there anymore, surrounded by people who didn't seem to care how much this hurt. As I laid down on the pull-out couch in the den that night, I stared up at the ceiling, wondering if I was overreacting or if my family had just completely stopped caring about me. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. The pull-out couch in the den was predictably uncomfortable, and my mind hadn't stopped racing since the moment I lay down. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the moment I'd walked into my old room, or rather, the shell of what used to be my room. It wasn't just the room itself that hurt. It was the fact that nobody seemed to care what it meant to me. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, the house was already bustling. I could hear the kids running around upstairs, their high-pitched voices carrying down the hallway, and my mom was in the kitchen, humming as she made breakfast. For a moment, I considered just grabbing my keys and leaving, but something held me back. Maybe I was hoping someone would acknowledge how I was feeling. Or maybe I just didn't want to seem like the bad guy for leaving without saying anything. As I stepped into the kitchen, my mom greeted me with her usual bright smile, as though nothing had happened the night before. "Morning, Jake. There's coffee on the counter if you want some." "Oh, and I made pancakes, your favorite." I forced a small smile. "Thanks." Grabbing a mug, I poured myself some coffee and leaned against the counter, watching her flip pancakes on the griddle. She glanced over at me. "You seemed a little upset last night. I hope you're feeling better this morning." It took everything in me not to let out a bitter laugh. I mean, yeah, I was upset. I came home expecting to sleep in my room, only to find out it's been turned into a playroom. And nobody even thought to tell me. She sighed, as though this conversation was already exhausting her. "Jake, I told you last night, we didn't think it was a big deal. You're an adult now. You don't need a room here." "That's not the point, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not about needing a room. It's about being included in the decision. You didn't even ask me how I'd feel about it." She flipped a pancake onto a plate and turned to face me, her expression softening just slightly. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Jake. But you have to understand, we're doing what's best for the family. Emily's here all the time with the kids, and they needed a space to play. You're barely here." There it was again. That subtle jab about how I didn't visit enough, as if that somehow justified turning my room into a dumping ground for toys. Before I could respond, Emily walked into the kitchen, still in her pajamas and holding a mug of coffee. She raised an eyebrow at me. Are we still talking about the room? I shot her a look. Yeah, we are. She sighed dramatically and set her mug down on the counter. Jake, seriously, get over it. It's not like they threw your stuff in the trash or anything. You're acting like we burned down the house. That's not the point, Emily. I snapped. You don't get it. That room meant something to me. It wasn't just a room. It was part of my childhood. It's the one place in this house that felt like mine, and now it's gone. She rolled her eyes. Oh my God, Jake. You're almost 30. Why are you so hung up on a childhood bedroom? You moved out years ago. What, are you expecting mom and dad to keep it like a shrine for you or something? It's not about that, I said, my voice rising. It's about the fact that nobody even cared enough to ask me how I'd feel about it. You all just made the decision without me, like my opinion doesn't matter. Emily crossed her arms and leaned against the counter, her expression unimpressed. Well, maybe if you actually came home once in a while, you'd have known about it sooner. But you're so busy with your big city life that you only bother to visit when it's convenient for you. So, yeah, we didn't think you'd care. I stared at her, stunned. That's not fair, and you know it. Just because I don't live here anymore doesn't mean I don't care about this family. She snorted. Could have fooled me. Emily, my mom scolded, finally stepping in, but Emily just shrugged and grabbed her coffee, clearly unbothered. I turned to my mom, my voice tight. So that's how it is? I'm just some outsider now? Her expression softened again, but it didn't make me feel any better. Of course not, Jake. You're part of this family. But families change. Things evolve. You've got your own life now, and we have to do what's best for the people who are here every day. I shook my head, feeling the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Yeah, I get it. I'm not here enough, so I don't matter. That's not what we're saying, my mom said quickly, but I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I set my coffee down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen, ignoring the way Emily muttered something under her breath as I left. I went upstairs, mostly to get away from everyone, but also because I needed to see for myself what was left of my stuff. If they'd boxed it up and put it in the attic, like my mom said, maybe there was still something salvageable, something that felt like mine. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with random boxes and old furniture that hadn't seen the light of day in years. I started rummaging through the piles, searching for anything that might have come from my room. Eventually, I found a couple of boxes labeled Jake stuff in my mom's handwriting. I opened one and immediately felt a pang of nostalgia as I saw some of my old things. A baseball glove, a shoebox full of ticket stubs from concerts I'd gone to in high school, and a stack of notebooks filled with half-finished sketches and short stories. For a moment, I just sat there, sifting through the box and letting the memories wash over me. This was what they'd taken from me. Not just a room, but a part of who I was. And the fact that they'd done it without even asking felt like a slap in the face. I spent the next hour going through the boxes, pulling out a few things I wanted to take with me. As I packed up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the room. It was about the way my family saw me, or didn't see me, as the case seemed to be. They'd made it clear, in no uncertain terms, that I was an afterthought, and I didn't know how to fix that. By the time I came back downstairs, the house was quieter. The kids had gone outside to play, and Emily was sitting on the couch with Marcus, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as I passed by, but I didn't say anything. I went straight to the den, grabbed my bag, and headed for the front door. Jake? My mom's voice stopped me just as I was about to step outside. I turned to see her standing in the hallway, looking concerned. Where are you going? I need some air, I said shortly. Are you coming back? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. I don't know, I admitted. And then I left, letting the door close behind me. I drove aimlessly for a while after leaving the house, unsure of where I was going or what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to keep driving and not look back. Another part felt guilty for storming out like that, even though I was convinced I had every right to be upset. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop I used to go to in high school. It was one of those places that hadn't changed at all over the years, right down to the faded "best coffee in town" sign in the window. I ordered a black coffee and sat in a corner booth, staring at the steam rising from my cup as I tried to sort through my thoughts. Was I being unreasonable? That question had been nagging me since last night. My family seemed to think so, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about the room. It was about everything leading up to this moment. The years of being treated like I was less important, the way my parents always seemed to prioritize Emily and her kids over me. As much as I hated to admit it, Emily wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't visit as often as I probably should have. But it wasn't because I didn't care about my family. It was because every time I came home, I felt like I didn't belong, like I was just an outsider looking in. I pulled out my phone and debated calling Brandon, my best friend. He'd always been good at giving me perspective when I needed it. But before I could hit the call button, the screen lit up with an incoming call from my dad. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me didn't want to talk to him, but I figured if he was calling, it must have been important. Reluctantly, I answered. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Jake," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Where are you?" "I'm out," I replied. "Just needed to clear my head." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "Look, I know things got a little heated this morning. Your mom's worried about you." "Of course she is," I said, a hint of sarcasm creeping into my voice. "Wouldn't want the playroom drama to ruin the family weekend." "Jake," he said firmly, and I could tell he wasn't in the mood for jokes. "I'm trying to have a real conversation here." I sighed, leaning back in the booth. "Fine. What do you want to talk about?" He hesitated again, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "I know you're upset about the room, and I get it. I do. But you have to understand, it wasn't an easy decision for your mom and me. Emily needed the space for the kids, and you're not here very often. We thought it made the most sense. So you're just going to keep repeating the same thing everyone's been saying?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "That I don't come home enough, so I don't deserve to have a place here?" "That's not what I'm saying," he said quickly. "But Jake, you have to admit, you've been pulling away from us for a while now. It's like you're always keeping one foot out the door, even when you're here." I frowned, his words catching me off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," he paused, then let out a sigh. "Look, your mom and I have noticed it for a while now. You're distant. You don't open up to us the way you used to. And it's not just us. You barely talk to Emily anymore either. It's like you've built this wall around yourself, and we're all on the other side of it." His words stung more than I wanted to admit. I didn't think I'd been distant, at least not intentionally. But hearing him say it like that made me wonder if there was some truth to it. "That's not fair," I said, my voice quieter now. "It's not like I've done it on purpose. I don't know. Life gets in the way." "I get that," he said. "But Jake, we're your family. We're supposed to be the one thing in your life that doesn't get pushed aside." There was a long silence between us, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, he spoke again. "Look, I don't want to fight with you. Just come back to the house. We'll figure this out together." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could just sit down and talk like a normal family and work through everything. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than a single conversation. "I'll think about it," I said eventually. "Okay," he said, sounding relieved. "Just let me know, all right? Your mom's making dinner, and it wouldn't feel right if you weren't there." "Yeah," I said, though I didn't make any promises. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot. I thought about what my dad had said, about how I'd been pulling away from the family. Was that really true? Or was it just easier for them to pin the blame on me than to acknowledge their own part in all of this? As I mulled it over, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Brandon. "Brandon, hey man, everything okay? You went quiet on me." I sighed and texted back. "Not really. Family stuff. Long story." He replied almost immediately. "Want to talk about it?" After a moment's hesitation, I typed, "Yeah. Can I call you?" A minute later, I was sitting in my car, the phone pressed to my ear as Brandon answered. "Jake, what's going on?" I let out a heavy sigh. "You got a minute? This might take a while." "For you?" Always, he said, his tone light but sincere. I launched into the whole story, from the moment I walked into the house to finding out my room was gone to the argument with Emily and the conversation with my dad. Brandon listened quietly, only interrupting occasionally to ask a question or make a comment. When I finally finished, he let out a low whistle. Damn, man. That's rough. I don't blame you for being pissed, right? Thank you, I said, feeling a small sense of validation. But, he added, I gotta ask, do you think maybe your dad has a point? About you pulling away? I groaned. Not you too. Hey, I'm just saying, he said. I mean, it sounds like your family handled this whole thing pretty poorly, but if you've been keeping your distance, maybe they're feeling it too. And instead of talking about it, they're just, being passive-aggressive about it. I frowned, leaning back in the driver's seat. So what? This is all my fault now? I'm not saying that, Brandon said quickly. But if you want things to change, you've got to be willing to meet them halfway. Maybe this is your chance to have a real conversation with them. Lay it all out on the table. I didn't respond right away. As much as I hated to admit it, Brandon had a point. I couldn't keep running away from this. If I wanted my family to treat me differently, I had to start by being honest about how I was feeling. Yeah, I said finally. Maybe you're right. Of course I'm right, he said with a laugh. Now go fix things before your mom guilt trips you into oblivion. I managed a small chuckle. Thanks, man. I'll let you know how it goes. Good luck, he said, and we hung up. I sat there for a while longer, staring at the house in the distance, trying to muster the courage to go back. If I was going to have this conversation, I needed to be ready for whatever came next. Finally, I took a deep breath, started the car, and headed back toward home. When I got back to the house, the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the driveway. My stomach churned as I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me anchored. Brandon's words were still running through my head, about meeting them halfway, about having a real conversation. But I had no idea how to start. The front door opened before I could get out of the car. My dad stepped onto the porch, squinting against the fading sunlight. He raised a hand in a small wave, and for a second, I considered just driving off again. But something about the look on his face stopped me. With a sigh, I grabbed my bag and got out of the car. Hey, he said as I walked up the steps. Hey, I replied, my voice stiff. He opened the door for me, and I stepped inside, bracing myself for whatever was waiting. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd left earlier. My mom was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, and I could hear Emily and Marcus talking softly in the living room. The kids were nowhere to be seen. Probably upstairs in their new playroom, I thought bitterly. My mom glanced up as I entered, her face lighting up with a smile. Oh, Jake, you're back. I was worried you wouldn't come. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything yet. I'm making pot roast, she added, as though that would somehow fix everything. It'll be ready in about an hour. Sounds good, I said flatly. She hesitated, her smile faltering. Why don't you come sit in the kitchen with me while I finish up? We can talk. I glanced toward the living room, where Emily was sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her. She looked up when she heard my mom's invitation, her expression unreadable. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. No thanks, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I think I'll just go for a walk. Before my mom could respond, I turned and headed back out the door. I didn't go far, just down the street and around the block. The crisp evening air helped clear my head, and by the time I returned, I'd made up my mind. If I was going to have this conversation, I couldn't do it halfway. I needed to lay everything out, even if it meant opening some old wounds. When I walked back into the house, everyone was already sitting at the dining table. The pot roast smelled amazing, but I barely noticed. My mom looked up hopefully as I entered, and my dad gave me a small nod. Emily didn't say anything, but I could feel her watching me. Jake, come sit down, my mom said, motioning to the empty chair at the end of the table. I hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat down. The weight of the room settled on my shoulders as everyone waited for me to speak. Before we eat, I began, my voice tight, I think we need to talk. My mom's smile faded, and she exchanged a quick glance with my dad. Emily raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. About what? My dad asked carefully. About everything, I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. About how I feel like I don't matter to this family anymore. About how you all made this huge decision about my room without even asking me. About how every time I come home, I feel like I don't belong here. My mom opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. Just let me finish. She closed her mouth, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I get it, okay? I don't live here anymore. I don't have kids, and I don't visit as often as I probably should. But that doesn't mean I don't care about this family. It doesn't mean I don't care about this house, or the memories I have here. And it doesn't mean it's okay for you all to just erase me like I don't matter. Jake, my dad said softly, nobody's trying to erase you. Really? I shot back. Because that's exactly what it feels like. You gave my room to Emily's kids without even thinking about how I'd feel about it. And then, when I said I was upset, you all acted like I was being selfish. Like I was the one in the wrong for caring. My mom reached across the table, her eyes full of regret. Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I thought you'd moved on. That you wouldn't mind. How could you think that? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. This is my home too, Mom. At least it was supposed to be. The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over everyone. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and for a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she let out a sigh and shook her head. Jake, I get that you're upset, she said, her tone measured. But you're blowing this way out of proportion. It's not like they kicked you out of the house or anything. They just made a decision that worked best for the whole family. You're acting like you're the only one who matters. I stared at her, stunned. That's not what this is about, Emily, and you know it. This isn't just about the room. It's about how you've always been the favorite. How everything has always revolved around you and your needs. And I've always been the afterthought. Her eyes narrowed. That's not fair. It's the truth, I said, my voice rising. Mom and Dad have been bending over backward for you your entire life. And I've been sitting on the sidelines, just waiting for them to notice me. But they never did. And now, even as an adult, it's the same thing. You and your kids come first, and I'm just there. Jake, my dad said, his voice firm. That's not true. We love you and Emily equally. We always have. Then why doesn't it feel like it? I shot back. Nobody had an answer to that. My mom looked like she might cry, and my dad just stared at the table, his jaw tight. Emily folded her arms and leaned back in her chair, clearly done with the conversation. Look, I said after a long silence, my voice calmer now. I'm not asking for much. I just want to feel like I'm part of this family. I want to feel like I matter. Is that really too much to ask? My dad looked up at me, his expression softening. No, Jake, it's not. And I'm sorry if we've made you feel that way. That was never our intention. My mom nodded, wiping her eyes. We'll do better, Jake. I promise. I wanted to believe them. I really did. But part of me wondered if things would ever actually change. I hope so, I said quietly. Dinner was awkward after that. Nobody really knew what to say, and the tension in the air was palpable. I picked at my food, barely tasting it, and excused myself as soon as I could. That night, as I lay on the pull-out couch again, I stared up at the ceiling and wondered if coming home had been a mistake. Maybe I was asking for something they just weren't capable of giving me, and maybe it was time to stop expecting them to. The next morning, I woke up early, long before anyone else in the house. The quiet felt like a relief, a brief moment where I didn't have to brace myself for another round of awkward conversations or sideways glances. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Last night's dinner had left me feeling hollow. My parents had apologized, sure, but something about it felt incomplete. Like they were saying the words to smooth things over, not because they truly understood what I was trying to tell them. And Emily, well, Emily was Emily. She hadn't apologized at all, and I doubted she ever would. I got up, quietly folded the pull-out couch back into its frame, and grabbed my bag. The idea of staying another day felt unbearable, and I knew I needed to leave. But before I walked out the door, I had one last thing to say. I scribbled a note on the back of an old grocery list I found on the kitchen counter, keeping my words short but clear. Mom, Dad, I love you, but I need some space. I don't feel like I belong here anymore, and I think we all need some time to figure out how to fix that. If you want to talk, you know how to reach me. But for now, I think it's best if I go. Jake. I left the note where they'd see it, then quietly slipped out the front door, letting it click shut behind me. The drive back to my apartment was long and quiet, the kind of quiet that made my thoughts feel louder than they actually were. I kept going over everything that had happened, how I'd stood up for myself, how I'd tried to make them see me. A part of me felt proud for finally speaking my truth, but another part felt empty, like I'd been hoping for something that was never really going to come. When I finally pulled into my parking spot, I sat there for a while, the weight of everything settling over me. I didn't know what was going to happen with my family. I didn't know if things would ever really change. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to keep waiting for them to see me. If they wanted me in their lives, they were going to have to meet me halfway. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could be okay with that.